Hello and welcome to the great telco debate of 2021. For the second year running, we are staging the event online as travel restrictions and a worsening COVID situation make an in-person conference simply no longer viable. But fear not, because having completed over 500 programs and online broadcasts since the start of the COVID outbreak, we're certainly up for the challenge. Now, our debates will now be broadcast live over 3 consecutive days. That's 2 debates per day. And you can see the full programme of debates here, and there are more details on the TelecomTV website. We start today with our first debate, Open Telco Infra, and follow this in about 2 hours' time with private 5G. And just as we would have done in person at our London event, each 45-minute debate will feature a mix of expert witness statements from our invited guests, an accompanying motion that we want you all to vote on, and a Q&A discussion with questions from our audience. The only difference is that we are online, and I'm afraid you'll have to provide your own tea and scones. Sorry about that. Now, joining me for today's debate is my colleague Ray Lemaitre, Editorial Director at TelecomTV. And Ray, this event has always been an open, no-holds-barred forum on the future of telecoms with plenty of audience interaction. We've been calling for viewer questions. How are we doing so far?
Thanks, Guy. Well, we have a few questions in already, but I know we're going to get a lot more as our expert witnesses make their statements. But don't delay, as we'll be delivering your questions to today's speakers on a first-come, first-served basis. So send in your questions as fast as you can.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Yes, get your questions in now as soon as possible, and you can use the form we provide on the website. Now, it wouldn't be the great telco debate without Chris Lewis and Graham Wild. And as they have done ever since the very first event, the two of them have written the all-important motions for the debates. And it's these motions that we want you to vote on.
And earlier this week, Chris and Graham got together to decide who would advocate in favour of the motion and who against.
We chose this motion because it's important for the telecom industry to understand that it's not just about the inner workings of telecoms, but it's about the outside influences and the relative role that telecoms will play in the broader digital ecosystem. I'm arguing for this motion because I believe the telecom industry used to rely on its internal technological view of the world rather than what it delivers to the outside world. As we evolve towards more software-based networks, we absolutely have to open up the APIs, open up the ecosystem to bring in the innovation that allows telcos to deliver the service to the other parties in the ecosystem. So yes, of course, connectivity on its many levels is fundamental to that ecosystem delivery, but actually opening up and allowing other parties to play alongside the telecom providers is the way in which we will open up new revenue streams, we will increase the relevance, and we will keep the standards of service delivered to an absolute optimum to address our personal, business and societal requirements.
So I'm going to speak against this motion today. And the reason for that is that I think it's important that telcos maintain a level of control over their network and over the services that they provide. And I don't actually think that being open necessarily delivers that. In fact, it may deliver the opposite. It may lead to increased complexity and increased cost and make it harder to deliver the kinds of reliable services that telcos need to deliver to their business and consumer customers. So that's why I'm against the motion.
Chris Lewis there with Graham Wild explaining the motion and their arguments for and against. And later in the show, we'll see if they manage to sway your votes. As regular Great Telco Debate attendees know, we first hear a range of views and opinions, our expert witness statements. And these will then lead into our Q&A discussion and hopefully give rise to some interesting questions from our audience. So let's now meet our special guests. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us in the Great Telco Debate this year. Good to see you all. Now it's time for our opening comments, and as always, we are imposing a strict time limit of 3 minutes for each of our expert witness statements. So let me first introduce Franz Sizer, VP Access Disaggregation at Deutsche Telekom. Franz, it's very good to see you again. May we have your expert witness statement on Open Telco Infra?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My pleasure. Openness. I think we are all in agreement. Openness always played a key role in telco. Of course, in the past, we had a couple of vertical silos, access, core, voice, which were closed silos, but there was always openness interfaces in between. And as technology evolves, cost pressure evolves, we also see a strong trend going to a more horizontal architecture with different layers. In order to keep economies of scale, it's of course extremely important, and also the move to software that lower layers can be controlled by higher layers in a simple way, in a unified way, in order to allow economies of scale. And that's all about open APIs for the higher layer to be able to work with lower layers across boundaries. And that, as said, doesn't need to stop at our network borders, because the whole way how services are provided, how we interwork, how we collaborate with partners, how we make our services controllable on a finer granular level, again, the solution is open APIs and making the things accessible. That doesn't mean it can be accessed widely. Of course, there has to be control on APIs and API management and access management. But there is no way around to push further this openness, going the next level of opening up our networks, making parts of the network interchangeable easily. By that, we can bring in innovative new solutions quickly, and being fast is the rule of these days. That's simply the nature of a much more software-driven ecosystem, delivering customer demands in very short times, to some extent even allowing the customer to control the details of the connectivity solution to get and services on top. So it's very obvious to me, open APIs, there is simply no alternative on going that direction. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Franz, for your opening statement. Yeah, I think we're going to hear a lot more about open APIs and also the economies of scale that result. Well, next, I'd like to introduce Boris Maurer. Boris is Managing Director, Communications and Media Industry Lead for Europe at Accenture. Good to see you again, Boris. Could we please have your opening statement?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And it's actually a very important topic, because, it's all about the future of this industry. If we think about the telco industry, and if we look at our revenue streams that we have today, they only know one direction, and that is down. So we need to reinvent what we deliver to our customers. We need to create new experiences, and we need to create experiences that our customers are used to, both on the B2C as well as on the B2B side. And the experiences that they're used to are experiences which are delivered on web scale, and which are adapting all the time, every day, to their needs and to what they use those services for. So we need to become much faster in this industry in adapting to customer needs and to the services that they are asking for. We need to do that in a more innovative way, because those services are changing much faster than they did in the past. And we need to do that in an ecosystem that is constantly changing. So we need to get out of our comfort zone and actually learn to collaborate in new ways, adopt new ways of working, also new ways on how we actually manage the network and manage quality, and also manage the service in front and the experience in front of the customers, which is hard. So I think it's not the discussion whether we need to be open or whether we can be closed. I think we need to be open. More the question is, and I think this is the important debate, is how do we get it done? Because today, if we just would move from the traditional closed model with managing vendors by a CSP to an open model where you have 10 times or 20 times the number of vendors, where you have more connections, where you need to establish a new way of working, where basically it's like in elementary school, where for the first time the kids need to sing together. This is all new, and it needs to be put into a new framework. And we're still finding this framework. So it doesn't feel good to basically get started now, but still it's absolutely necessary. If we want to have new revenue streams, if we want to keep our costs under control, if we want to basically create new customer experience, we need to have to do it. And there is one final reason. If we think about the future business model of CSPs, it won't be connectivity alone. If they want to basically create value in the future, they need to combine connectivity, compute, and security through the marketplaces of the future and deliver that to their customers. That needs a complete new interplay with new partners anyways.
Great. Thank you very much, Boris, for your opening statement. As you say, the move from CSPs to DSPs. And I'm glad you brought up the question of how we do it, because I'm sure our audiences are going to ask us and sending a lot of questions exactly on that area. Well, let me now introduce our next guest, Klaus Pedersen, who is Vice President of the Communication Technology Group at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Klaus, very good to have you back on the program with us. Can we now have your expert witness statement, please?
Yes, so the Communications Technology Group within Hewlett-Packard Enterprise set up specifically to serve the telecommunications sector, and as such, we are all about trying to help our customers, both with partners and directly, gain market share, deliver value so they are more profitable. And we've seen over the last many years how open systems have played a significant role in bringing efficiencies and innovation into the networks themselves, the way they're being built, the big differences between 3G, 4G, and 5G as we introduced more open systems there. And inevitably, that has to continue upwards out towards the market. I think the notion that we as an industry can close down and bring all the innovations that our customers need, so that is the customers of the telecommunications sector, the enterprises, the consumers, governments, that all that can be created in-house just doesn't work. We have to create platforms that allow that to be delivered in secure, scalable ways, that so other businesses can build on top of that, and that requires an open network. It's evident, I think, to me.
Great, thank you very much, Klaus. Collaboration through platforms, yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of these topics. This whole open telco infra debate has been vexing our audience for quite some time. So thanks for your statement there. And let's introduce our next guest who is joining us live today, Renu Navale, who's Vice President of Data Platforms Group and the General Manager, Smart Edge Platforms Division at Intel. Renu, good to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us on the Great Telco Debate. Can we now have your expert witness statement?
Absolutely, Guy, and thanks for having me again on this show. If we look at where, as an industry, we've been evolving over the last few years, it's been all about the transition to network function virtualization and software-defined networks. And all of this transition, the foundation or the fundamental principle behind it all has been open, standards-based, and disaggregated infrastructure. And now this journey or this transition is also continuing into this era of 5G as well as the edge. Now the Nfv and Sdn journey, it started in the core networks a few years ago, and it's very encouraging, to see today that nearly half of all the new 2021 core network developments or deployments were all virtualized and running on standard off-the-shelf servers, with the vast majority of them running on, Intel Xeon processors. Now we expect this to grow to about, more than 80% by 2024 because of this massive tailwind behind our network transformation as well as 5G. And again, all of this is because of a more open, standards-based, general-purpose, server-based infrastructure. Now we're seeing this transition also move into the RAN, where we're seeing virtualized and open RAN really starting to pick up. We had many debates on is the RAN ever going to become virtualized, and now we're seeing that hey, this market will likely be a $22.5 billion market by 2023. And then in the same vein, it's also moving towards the edge. Now, when you think about the edge, the intelligent edge, where flexibility, scalability, all of that is critical. And also the fact that at the edge, you will have diverse verticals, various types of applications, services. Again, a very open ecosystem where we can take advantage of the application vendors as well as the developer ecosystem is going to be so critical for us to have this intelligent, agile, and scalable, and even programmable edge cloud systems that's again based on this open infrastructure that telcos can extend from the wireless core to the open RAN and to the edge.
Thank you very much, Renu, for your opening statement. Yes, this transformation is indeed continuing, as you say, and moving towards the edge and the RAN. Now, I'd like to introduce our final guest for our Open Telco Infra debate, Azhar Saeed, who is Chief Architect at Red Hat. Azhar, great to have you on the show again. Good to see you. Can we now have your expert witness statement, please?
Thank you, Guy. Thank you for the opportunity. I think there were some really good statements made by the panelists here. Let me just step back for a moment and see what open is all about. Open provides flexibility. Open provides scale. Open provides nimbleness and agility. Open provides the ability to ride Moore's law in terms of the cost curve. Open provides inclusion. Open provides innovation. Open provides collaboration. Now, are these things a typical telco cares about? What are some of the typical telco challenges that they have today? How do they innovate faster? How do they scale their infrastructure faster? How do they be nimble so as to address new services quickly? How do they bring in an ecosystem together that allows them to be meaningful in terms of the services they offer and not let the OTT players rule the roost on their infrastructure? So how do they participate in that? How do they collaborate with different peers or different vendors or different communities? All of these things can only be done if they truly are open as an organization, and then they're looking at their infrastructure also as to be open in order to be able to provide these kind of different services. In US, we actually run a program on National Public Radio on NPR called Open Source. That open source has got nothing to do with open source software. It's got everything to do with open source content. And what you really hear on that program, I'm not trying to provide a plugin for NPR, but what is important is you hear fantastic user listener stories that are broadcast in the form of podcasts. Now, you learn a lot from that, which means being open and taking in content or taking in capability from others allows you to be inclusive so that people are not just sideline watchers and they're actually participating as part of the progress and innovation and the development of that particular infrastructure and services, allows you to be more relevant to your audience, to what as a telco or as a CSP you're trying to provide to your subscribers. Now, when you are relevant, when you are nimble, when you are innovative, that's when your subscribers more tune towards you. So then you can actually erode that declining revenues. And then you can actually go improve that bottom line in order to make sure that you're providing the right kind of capability. So really, open is absolutely here to stay. It's not the question of should we need to be open at this time in this in timeline. It is a must. The question may be when, and I think we can debate that.
Absolutely, Azhar. I'm sure we're just about to do that. And as you quite rightly say, it's community collaboration and don't lose sight of your customers, because that's what you're in business for, is your customers. Thank you very much, everyone, for your opening statements. So you've heard from our expert witnesses. Now it's time to challenge them. So send us your questions, don't delay, and we'll get through as many as we can. Ray, we've had a range of views expressed there from our expert witnesses, and we've given our audience plenty of time to send in questions. Any initial thoughts or questions from you?
Well, my initial thought is that we have a very kind of, I would say, pro-open infra panel here today, and I guess that's not a major surprise in many ways. But I think we all know as well that not the whole industry is not completely behind this idea of open infrastructure networks. And some of the questions we have already in from today's audience is reflecting that. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a first come, first served in terms of the questions coming in. So please get them in as soon as possible. We have a bunch here already. I'm going to start off with the first one. And this is that age-old question about integration. And the question is, in an open network, the number of suppliers brought into the ecosystem integrating different products, that makes it a very complex task. Who will own the end-to-end service violations and SLAs, and how do you track them? So this is really coming down to this question about who actually owns the whole domain, who's in charge when things hit the fan, I guess, if you like. Boris, let's come to you first. Thanks for volunteering then, and then Franz.
Okay, so I think it's a question and it's unanswered because, as I said, we are still in elementary school and everybody's singing, and it's not quite that we're all singing together. So we are learning this. Actually, I think it's also not an easy question because when I'm speaking now coming from a system integrator, that's the biggest question around, can we take end-to-end accountability? We probably could. But it's very hard because we probably are still 10-15% of the services of an end-to-end network. So we cannot take 85% of that onto our balance sheet. So actually, it turns out to be two questions. Number one is setting up a system that is guaranteeing quality of service end-to-end. And that is actually where we are investing heavily to make that working end to end. So having all those processes, having a fully automated CI, CD, CT pipeline management, having all visibility, having all management tools available to actually do that. The second question is, how do we basically create the right balance sheets for that? And I think this is the second debate that we need to have. And then it will take some time until the new ecosystem have found themselves and are working seamlessly together. And the more we work into standardization of interfaces and then basically can align around that, the faster it will evolve.
Okay, thanks, Boris. I mean, yes, clearly we're at the very early stages here, but this has cropped up time and time again as a major concern. Franz, what is your view on this? Who do you think can take responsibility, especially around the question of SLAs?
Yeah, it's very straightforward in my eyes, because it always has been and it always will be, from a very high end-to-end level, the responsibility of an operator. I mean, it's our core business to provide connectivity and services in good quality to our customers. So of course it's up to us to make sure this happens. The question is, how much of that do we do ourselves, and what do we give to partners and put them in charge to deliver certain subcomponents? That's already what we are doing today, and that's what we are going to do in future. It's just that in future the split up will look differently, and there will be different solutions. Some will say we do more with own workforce, we want to do more ourselves. Other may continue in a setup that is pretty similar to how it's done today. So having a lot of responsibility to partners, and just the nature of the partners may change. So we will see all this variety. I think what is changing on top in an open ecosystem the ecosystem itself can take quite a big part of making sure things work together smoothly. There is a certain level of quality of these things by having, and we see also that raising, we don't think back, this hasn't been in place 5 to 10 years ago, about all these open initiatives, be it TIP, be it the Oran Alliance OTIC, be it the ONF lab. So the community and the ecosystem itself is taking much more responsibility and is doing much more to provide a framework so different components you have in an open environment are already properly working together. So the task that remains for individual operators, because we have slightly different approaches, things look different in detail. So the part, of course, that remains is making sure these pieces do fit into our own environment. And then the question is, as said, how much do we want to do ourselves and how much we will work with partners to make that happen. But end to end, it can only be us, because this is where we make our money from.
Okay, thanks, Franz. That was very clear. Yes, Azar, I can see you're going to come in on this, and then we're going to move to the next question because they are really starting to flood in now. So Azar, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. I'll keep it very short. Franz framed it right. Open requires a mindset change. When that, you really have to embrace it. And with that mindset change, then you can institute all of the things that Franz was just talking about. We and our customers have already done something called a distributed CI, which means the ability to integrate software components from different vendors and then bring it down via pipeline into the operator environment, where the operator actually looks at the CSP, actually looks at it, and maintains that. It's being done today, so it's not rocket science, and it's being done. So I think start with that open mindset first. You can embrace all of these capabilities.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So moving on now to one of the core parts of the motion today about how open might drive innovation. And so the question here is, innovation requires investment. It doesn't just happen by itself. It doesn't come for free. And the question is, to what extent does the industry need more government involvement or intervention to help fund these kind of innovations or new labs, or et cetera, et cetera? This comes on the back of the announcement today from the UK, where there were about more than £30 million worth of projects have been funded in the Open RAN area, and there was a commitment from the UK operators along with the government to have 30% of UK mobile traffic running over Open RAN based networks by 2030. So do we need more government intervention? Do we need any government involvement whatsoever? Boris, I saw your hand go up there. Let's come to you first.
So a little bit twisted on this one. So I actually absolutely like that we set our targets like we need to electrify traffic and cars, because we know that's the end state. I'm a little bit worried that we say we're going to support ORAN. What I would rather like to see is we need to basically see how new ecosystems evolve, and they need to have interoperability. So let's rather assume ORAN will happen, and not whether it's 30% of the traffic or whatever, but we need to have new ecosystems that are evolving and interoperating. So I would be very much more interested in, hey, how do we interoperate and what's the framework for that? And let's work on that this is seamlessly. We need to basically security. So what is the security framework that actually makes us feel confident with what is happening, and also what we're going to do with future networks that provide connectivity, compute, and need to operate in a secure and also privacy securing environment? And the third one is we need to not only think about the networks, but also basically, especially with 5G, we will enable the metaverse. We will bring Web 3.0 to life. So we will bring the virtual world and the real world together. And we also need to think about how is this actually happening. So how we are going to create interoperability and integration for XR, VR, augmented reality scenarios in the future. So I would rather more think about those topics than say, hey, I'm going to, like, for example, also my home government did, I'm going to spend 2 billion on Open RAN. I think we need to be specific on the outcomes that we want to achieve.
Okay, excellent points, Boris. Thank you. And I saw, Franz, you wanted to come in there as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the one I have to talk about. I think at least I think most of you are aware, there is this MOU coalition of 5 big European operators, Vodafone, Telefonica, Telecom Italia, Orange, and us. And we just recently published an ecosystem paper where we made very clear where we believe some help and support from public side is required to develop the ecosystem. And I don't want to repeat all that. We are very, the 5 of us, really very convinced this is the way to go. And we committed ourselves to develop and to drive that. But we also want to make sure, as we are 5 big European ones, that Europe continues to play a role here. And this is where we believe there is support is extremely useful to make sure also a European ecosystem develops and flourishes around the topic. We have a couple of very good players in Europe in this space, as we know, but we believe there is room for more, and we really want to make sure Europe is part of that innovation and keeps that leading role, but in a much broader sense and more players. And this is where we believe government support would be super critical to help these companies sending clear signs and make this ecosystem develop and be ready once this technology will switch over to prime time, which is not that far out, some people believe, from my perspective.
Okay, excellent, Franz. And I should just point out that 30% of traffic, as recognised by the UK government and the operators today, is not a quota, it's not a mandate, that is an ambition. Okay, the questions really are, I'm having to read them as you talk and come in because there's so many coming in. Let's move to the next one now. And this is a really interesting one. It's very easy to focus on the technical issues of open, but how much does the panel feel that real openness is more about cultural openness? Telco has been very good at creating lots of open API initiatives that have failed to be adopted by others. So with this whole area, whole topic of open and innovation and inviting more companies to be involved in the development of applications and capabilities, to what extent that can this be, made to be a success? What can be done to change the culture within the industry? Would anybody like to come in on this one at all? Okay, yes, Klaus, thank you.
Yeah, so it's not a full answer, but I think as an industry, we are very technically oriented and we have a tendency to do this the wrong way around. A lot of the success of open since we introduced the first servers into the network based on Intel x86 and Linux, etc., has been about actually using the capabilities that are developed in other segments of industry, so the broader IT industry. And that's not just about the technology itself and the APIs, how they get defined, but really about how the whole ecosystem functions, where do we have the system integration capability that are necessary. All those practices are being built for a broader ecosystem. And I think we have to be a little bit better at not always trying to apply that telco special source to our APIs and standards, but rather really strive to use what's being developed in the broader industry, because that brings with it a large development community and system integration capability that address some of the issues that were discussed in the previous questions.
Okay, thank you, Klaus. And Azar, let's come to you. Is the strive for openness as much a cultural challenge or even more a cultural challenge than it is a technical one?
It definitely is, Ray. I briefly alluded to in my previous comment around open mindset. Mindset, culture, people, and process are also equally important in the adoption of open. And we've seen this. Our previous CEO, Jim Whitehurst, actually wrote a book on open organization. And all he talks about in that entire book is about culture and people in terms of how you can adopt a mindset that allows you to be more innovative, be more inclusive, be more collaborative. I'll give you one interesting example. I was talking to a telco, and we were talking for about half a day or so around cloud and cloud technologies and being open and open source, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of that conversation, one of the gentlemen who was sitting in that audience was confused in terms of how do I go around. He was from procurement, and he was confused in terms of how do I go around procuring this new equipment for cloud deployment. And so his mindset was still in, not to single him out, but it's a common challenge that he was used to purchasing boxes or racks that allowed him to, scale or expand capacity in a certain way. Now, cloud model allows you to actually instrument it, use telemetry to monitor and manage, and then incrementally add capacity and capability and be more dynamic and flexible. Well, he wasn't there to understand that concept yet. So absolutely, people and culture is incredibly important.
Okay, great. Thanks, Azar. I'm going to move on now to the next question so we get through as many as we can. And interesting, you mentioned procurement there, Azar, because the next question is really alluding to the economics of this. Yes, the operators would like to have more innovation and a broader set of vendors to choose from, be able to bring in capabilities more quickly, more flexibly, more easily. But for the CFO who is signing off on purchase orders, is there a short-term incentive around open infrastructures, not just Open RAN, but whether this is disaggregation in optical or broadband access, which is now starting to become a thing? Is there an incentive for the CFO to be signing off on purchase orders for open infrastructure telecom equipment? Anybody want to come in on that, on the question of whether there are, yes, Boris, thank you.
So I think the key thing is the procurement process is actually not open. Actually, what you typically would want to do is you would start collaborate, and then you have a great idea, and then you prove that this idea works, and then you scale it. If the teams that are working together are successful with that, they would expand and would do more of that. That doesn't need a classical procurement process, but this is not where we are. So probably that's the next debate to be had, and this is kill the RFP. But as long as we are not there and still are in this, I think, and I think this is the interesting case that we can learn, for example, from Rakuten in Japan, is that they actually have proven that they can, number one, build a network cheaper. That is on the greenfield side, but and some people say this cannot be done on brownfield. But on the other side, the other thing that they also prove is need 10x less people, and then they can automate more, and they can run a network more efficiently. So I think we have some early proof points now that the theory behind that there is economic advantages is actually coming into practice.
Okay, thank you, Boris. And Renu will come to you, and then Klaus quickly. So Renu.
Sure. So if you also, not just from a telco, OPEX and CAPEX perspective, but if you also see from the ecosystem perspective, almost all the ecosystem partners who are part of this open infrastructure, they do see, great resource efficiency or investment efficiency, right? The whole process of, using Linux or open source software, the process of upstreaming and downstreaming innovations and contributions into our software or our infrastructure, and being able to provide that, there is an inherent spiral of efficiencies and investment reductions within various ecosystem partners that can contribute towards the larger TCO benefits that the telcos are looking for as well. So there is that inherent benefit of efficiencies by using open or having this open ability to leverage the open innovations.
Okay, thanks, Renu. And Klaus.
Yeah, so a little bit back to what I was saying before. I think if we continue to procure, or the industry continues to procure, like we always did, it's harder to see the immediate benefit. But if we look outside the industry, the whole world is moving towards cloud-like as a service models. And for example, in Hewlett Packard Enterprise, we today, through our GreenLake program, are able to offer, compute as a service installed on-prem and working very much like we are used to in the industry, in the telco industry, but with the purpose of freeing up, CapEx investment, moving it to OpEx. But that requires a change of model. But if the CFO is willing to look at that, there's an opportunity there to free up a lot of capital and use it for investment rather than, immediate acquisition of stuff that then gets written off over the next 10 years. So I think looking at that as a service model that's becoming quite pervasive and implemented in many different ways is also leaning towards use of open systems and provides that immediate benefit I think the CFO is looking for.
Okay, yes, great points. Okay, I've been getting a message that we're already coming towards the end of the show. We've still got time for one more question. Because of that time constraint, I'm going to sort of bring two audience questions together here and blend them into one. So I'm going to do that as clearly as possible. So the question is, what do panelists believe need to happen in the evolution of the APIs that are needed for greater innovation? What needs to happen in the evolution of APIs to ensure that capabilities become exposed in a more standardized way across network functions to ensure that software reuse becomes easier and programmer skills are more easily transferable? And what impact will this have on the day-to-day operating model of telcos? So would anybody like to come in on that? How can we make skills more transferable? How can the open APIs become more standardized? And what impact will this have on the day-to-day operations of operators? Azar, thank you.
So the first one is abstractions are key in this context in terms of making sure the APIs are usable and making sure that the infrastructure is capable of, we have to make sure that the infrastructure, the software infrastructure that's there is capable of abstracting the underlying layers and the contexts so that workloads can be easily deployed. Second, automation is really key in order to make this successful. In my opinion, automation is a fundamental tenet, not an afterthought, not something that you bolt on, to the existing model, because software allows you to instrument a lot of things and provide telemetry, provide health checks, status, configuration stuff. And using that telemetry, now you can actually provide intelligence, glean intelligence, do analytics, and then operate that infrastructure in an automated way. So those things would be necessary in order to be able to ensure that the community can actually learn, operate in a much easier fashion. We are moving towards infrastructure or networks that are more what I call as self-organizing or managing infrastructure. What we also call as zero-touch operations, and that's really where we want to go through this open APIs, through this open infrastructure.
Okay, thank you, Azar. Yes, Renu.
Way for to ensure that there is transferability of programming capabilities or programming or even software assets. It's really what we're seeing is overall the industry has embraced cloud native or some of the cloud technologies that was being transitioned to the network, and then from the network it's transitioning to the RAN and the edge as well. So having the foundations of all of this being more cloud native like that forms a basis for the ability for programmable skills to be transferable, for software assets to where by again embracing some of the standard APIs it starts to become more interoperable. And that's one of the ways for us to start to bring what may seemingly seem like a disparate or diverse ecosystems. We need to start to bring it together, the cloud ecosystem with the networking or the telco ecosystem. And then there is this whole new breed of, hey, there's the application developer ecosystem that we also need to bring in, which then results in the ability to create new services and applications that can drive services revenue for the telco operators as well.
Okay, thank you, Renu. Would anybody like to come in with a final comment on today's debate? Yeah, well, actually, we'll get two very quick ones. We'll get Boris and then we'll get Franz to close. So, Boris.
Hey, just on the last discussion, I think one final thought that I would love to leave, and I think is up for further debate, is we need Android moment in network that basically exposes everything and creates the standardization. I think the open debate that we still need to have is because this Android moment in the device was done with Google, so one player. The question is, will we have a couple of ecosystems that actually evolve around hyperscalers or 2 or 3 players, or will industry host those APIs? Because we need to put them in software, and those software will be fast evolving. So the question is, what is the governance around it, and how will we host it? I think is still a thing that I hope the industry gets the heads around, because this will enable to spread faster what we all want to achieve.
Okay, fantastic point. And Franz, we'll come to you for the final comment.
That's great, thank you. So what does it need to spread APIs? And I think that's also some of the basic thought. Of course, we don't gain a lot if we end up in multiple similar but not same APIs all solving the same issue. So coming back to one of the strengths of our industry, that we are finally able to agree on certain common approaches. I think for some of the key APIs, especially the ones we want to expose north side, so that other players, other applications make use and can program our network, so to say, because API always means programmability, and what we're aiming for is making networks a programmable platform. But it only works and scales across the board if these APIs are common and not every operator has the same but different APIs. So one of the key things is to agree on some key common APIs that can be used and scale really on global basis to make that happen, which is one of the forms of abstraction we have seen. And I think we have a good history in our industry to be able to agree. It takes a little bit of time, but usually it's worth the effort to finally come to that scalable solution, even though we are a highly federated industry. So that's, from my perspective, what we need to achieve going forward here.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Franz. And let's not forget, we're still at the very early stages, really, of these developments. And I'm sure when we have the great telco debate next year, things will have moved on quite a lot. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we are incredibly already out of time. That went very quickly. Guy, we didn't even get a time to get to the question about whether it's tea and scones or tea and scones, and that did come in, but we just couldn't get to it. So I need to hand over to you at this point.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely scones. It's no way it's scones, and it's clotted cream first and jam on top. But yes, we do need to bring our discussion to a close, which means that it's almost time to tally the audience votes. And to remind you, here is the motion that we have asked you to vote on. Being open is the only way the CSPs can build the flexibility and agility needed to cope with the digital marketplace. But before we reveal the results, let's first see which way our guests will vote, either for or against. So, you've heard the motion, so let's all have a show of hands, please. First of all those in favour of the motion, raise your hands now. 1, 2, oh, well, look at this. It's 5. There's no point me even asking if any of you are against the motion. That is absolute whitewash. It's more of a whitewash than Australia in the Ashes. Thank you, everyone. Now let's go and see how this compares with our online viewer vote. Our expert witnesses voted overwhelmingly for the motion, but what did you decide? The voting is now closed. And here are the final numbers. Well, not quite a whitewash. 80-20. Those numbers are suspiciously rounded, but let me tell you, we have received an awful lot of votes for this. It does sound like there's only like 4 votes, but seriously, no, we received a lot of votes. 80-20. I thought it might be even higher. Ray, are you surprised, or did you expect this kind of result?
I expected it to be pro the motion, but I didn't expect it to be quite that high, because there's still so many questions to be answered, still quite a few doubts out there in the market. But an excellent debate and an excellent result.
Yes, the audience has voted. Thank you, Ray. And this does bring us to the end of our programme on open telco infra. And Ray, we'll see you again for the next debate. However, before we go, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for supporting this year's Great Telco Debate and our online programme series. And a big thank you, of course, to all of our guests, our expert witnesses. You all did a terrific job today. Thank you all very much indeed. And a reminder that the Great Telco Debate continues, because we'll be back in just over 1 hour, almost exactly 1 hour's time, for our next debate, which is on private 5G. You'll have to end this stream and go and click on the next programme on the website. So in the meantime, go and have a cup of tea and a scone, and we hope to see you for private 5G. Please keep sending in your questions. No need to wait for the show to begin. We really appreciate your contributions. For now, though, from all of the team here at Telecom TV and the Great Telco Debate, thank you for watching and goodbye.